purposes of our penultimate presentation, we remain in the UK with Rachael O'Connor. And if Rachael could come on the screen, I don't know.
Hello.
Hi there. Good morning.
Hi.
Are you in? You're in Leeds, yeah?
I am, yes.
Okay. We seem to be dominating from the UK.
Yeah.
So anyway, welcome, Rachael. You're a lecturer in law and director of Street Law, School of Law, University of Leeds. Your presentation will analyse findings from a pilot reverse mentoring study between staff and undergraduates and looks at the concept of reverse mentoring. And your abstract's really interesting, but I'll leave you to, explain what it is you're going to tell us.
Thank you. And yes, I really enjoyed all of the presentations, but as a vegan and a millennial myself, I've loved the sound of animal law, and would be really interested to hear more about that. So what I will do is share my screen. Okay, can we see my presentation?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So yes, thank you very much for that introduction. So I'm going to talk today about a pilot reverse mentoring study that I have undertaken this academic year in the law school. So I will tell you a little bit about what reverse mentoring is, but the study involved undergraduate international law students and members of academic staff, and also a member of student support staff. And the project unintentionally turned into a remote project because it ran into March and April when the university kind of shut down and we went online as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So some reflections on that. So thinking about staff and student well-being really is the focus of what I'll talk about today. Okay, so what is reverse mentoring? So apologies to those of you who've read about this before and know what it is, but the idea is really, as it says, to reverse the traditional mentoring relationship that we usually see, which would typically involve a senior, more experienced person mentoring a junior person. So reverse mentoring flips that relationship on its head. And it's about that usually more senior, often older, more experienced person becoming the mentee, and the junior, less experienced, you might say novice, becomes the mentor. And it's really about tapping into the knowledge that mentor may have in a particular area. So in this study, I'm really thinking about the knowledge and the experience of our students about their particular circumstances and experiences. And in this pilot study, as I said, it's thinking about international students. So what can we learn from international students? So reverse mentoring typically has involved, when it's been used it's traditionally used in workplace settings. So let's say senior management being mentored by junior employees. And it's often focused on this generational divide. So this idea that young people in the workforce now, millennials, Generation Z, they are what we might call, digital natives. They know everything there is to know about technology, social media, the internet, all of that. And they have these, as it says on the slide there, these technological expertise, which they can impart and educate senior management in. So that's really where reverse mentoring has developed in a business context. But what my project was inspired by was how reverse mentoring is starting to be used in the legal profession, and specifically in big international commercial law firms. And that has typically been from an equality and diversity perspective, which is what I was particularly interested in, and hence my reason for choosing international students for the pilot study. So lots of the, several of the big international law firms have started to use reverse mentoring as a tool to try and improve diversity in the kind of higher or more senior levels of the firm. So the picture on the side there is from Allen and Overy. So they have used reverse mentoring as a tool to try and get more females into partnership, for example, by educating or using those junior female lawyers to educate and mentor senior, typically white male partners. So that's kind of where this project was inspired. So as I said, my project involved international undergraduate students and members of academic staff. I wanted, having had discussed this with some of the law firms that have implemented reverse mentoring in their businesses, some very positive feedback from them, generally seen it as something that has really helped diversity, has helped relationships, these generational to bridge these generational gaps across the firm. I wanted to see, could this work in a higher education context? Thinking about the generational divide that we may often have between staff and students, but also thinking about other things that divide us, our backgrounds, our nationalities, our life experiences. So what I really wanted to get out of this project was, first and foremost, empowerment of students. And I chose international students because there is a lot of literature that's been written about the international student experience, all of which is, very important to the debate and, adds interesting perspectives to the debate. But a lot of it doesn't actually involve any, direct data or research from the students themselves. So this was about empowering the students within the reverse mentoring relationship itself, but also giving them a voice in the literature. I should say that I was, so again, another reason sort of to be inspired by this project, I was a corporate tax lawyer in a big international law firm before I became a lecturer. So from that experience, I learned a lot about hierarchy in the legal sector, and thought a lot about how, if anyone has come across Duncan Kennedy's article about legal education as training for hierarchy, made me think a lot about how we might reproduce those, what I've called unhealthy hierarchies in the law school setting. So this project is also about breaking down those barriers, building more meaningful relationships, and helping to create a cohesive international learning community within the law school. I also wanted to address biases and assumptions that we may make about students. We may make about international students, for example, from particular countries, or that, and vice versa. Biases and assumptions that students may make about us as academics, as lecturers. And this is a pilot study, so it's very much kind of a testing ground for, can this reverse mentoring method work between students and staff, and what I hope will be a springboard for a wider study. I would really like to link this in with legal practice and think about developing further that way. So very briefly then, what did the project look like? So I started with some focus groups, which were with staff and international students more generally. So that was in the first semester to help me get, I had an idea from my own teaching experiences, from the literature, about what some of the issues might be that this project could address. But I wanted to also, get it from the horse's mouth, as it were. So that helped me to develop the themes of the meetings, which I'll talk about shortly. And then there were 8 pairs, so 16 participants, 8 staff, 8 students. Each participant had an opening interview with me. Each pair was asked to have 4 meetings over 8 weeks. so fortnightly meetings. And I also asked them to complete reflective logs after each meeting, which they sent to me. And then at the end, I had a closing interview with everyone, which, as I mentioned, that all ended up being done the last couple of meetings for most pairs, and then their closing interview with me ended up being done online, as we were required to kind of move away from campus. So meetings, very briefly, these were the themes that I put together for the meetings, which came out of a review of the literature, the focus groups, and as I said, my own experience. So meeting one was really about the mentor and mentee getting to know each other. I should also add the participants had some training before they started the meetings as well, to help them kind of get around this idea of the role, the power reversal, the roles being reversed and the student becoming the mentor. So it was a general discussion about diversity and inclusion. What does it mean to me? What is my culture? How does it differ from the UK? And then the next meeting moved on to focus more specifically about these issues of identity. What does it mean to be an international student? How do I feel about that label? How does that relate to how I belong and how I feel in the school community? Meeting 3 got a little bit scuppered by the current situation, because that was supposed to involve the student mentor observing some teaching by their staff mentee and giving some direct feedback. And with moving online, some pairs weren't able to complete that meeting, which was a shame, but still had a good discussion about what is inclusive teaching, what is inclusive practice from the perspective of an international student. And then the final meeting, which I think was actually the most popular, I'd say, the one that I think the pairs felt they got the most out of, was this discussion around failure and resilience. Because something that kept coming up time and time again in the focus groups was this fear of failure that a lot of the international students had. Kind of emphasizing the additional pressures potentially that may be on these students, given their background, the very high fees that they're paying to study here, lots of external and internal factors that may make that idea of failing somehow all the more concerning. So very briefly then, just to finish off, the themes relating to well-being. So these, I've split this between staff mentee feedback and student mentor feedback. So well-being issues, some positive here, and also some that I think are potentially negative. And the first thing in the staff feedback was timing and workload challenges. So obviously, I was asking staff to participate in this project, and all of the participants were volunteers. Okay, so I think in anything that we do where we are asking staff to do more to help the students develop, and they're doing that kind of off their own back, we have to think about the additional pressures that on staff. A potential well-being red flag there about, yes, it's really important to take initiatives that might improve diversity and inclusion and community within the school and student relationships, but we have to consider the well-being impact of that on staff. But generally, aside from that, staff mentees reported really positively about this opportunity to share themselves more personally with the students that they were paired with. Of course, always within professional boundaries, but staff, one member described it as being a bit like a counselling session, where it was this really rare opportunity I was telling the student about me, I was thinking about my past experiences as a student, the challenges I've faced as a teacher, as an academic, and having the opportunity to discuss that with someone who is really invested in hearing about it. Common bonds between the staff and students, I think, were really important to developing a positive reverse mentoring relationship. So there was one pair who shared, a passion for music. One pair who the staff member had actually lived in the country where the student was from for several years as a young person. They had that connection. One pair, staff and student, now volunteer at the same homeless charity in Leeds. So these common bonds were found to be really important in developing a strong, positive mentoring relationship. I'm probably running out of time, so I'll briefly move on to some of the student mentor feedback. And again, similarly, students really got a lot out of this one-to-one, much more personal and strong relationship that they develop with their staff mentee. It was something different to the usual like personal tutoring relationship or the average relationship that they would have with a lecturer who was teaching them. And one of the biggest positives for well-being that I think came out of this was changing perceptions about getting help and support. This was something that the pairs talked about a lot. And several of the student mentors had previously been very reluctant to, access help, ask for applying for mitigating circumstances, going to see the student support team if they were struggling. And I think that was one really positive thing that the student mentors, almost all of them, developed through this project. I'm not afraid to ask for help anymore because I know that people within the school care. And it put that kind of meaning into the statement. I flicked through my slides now. Sorry, I'll go previous. Lots of positive feedback as well about what students discovered about themselves. There was a lot of personal development, confidence, resilience, recognition of the value of their voice, purely by giving this opportunity to just meet for an hour or so every fortnight, to be heard by a member of staff, and to recognise that the school actually really cares about their experiences and their voice. And lots of students got a lot out of, from their perspective, the idea that they were helping to progress change in the school. What they were feeding back on their experiences and their thoughts about these issues might actually change something for a future international student. And they really got a lot out of feeling that. Have I got any time left?
Yep, couple of minutes.
Okay, cool. Brilliant, thank you. So very quickly then, what do I think about reverse mentoring? Does it work? Well, throughout the whole project, I have to be honest, I really did think in the back of my head, I'm really not sure this is going to work. I think it might fall flat on its face, because the biggest thing I thought was that the student mentors may really struggle with this idea of the role reversal. Going back to the idea of a hierarchy, lots of students and often particularly international students who may come from quite a different educational background have this view that, we don't question the lecturers, why would we have these personal relationships with them? Why do they want to know about who I am and what I'm interested in? And actually, I found on the whole it worked brilliantly. This opportunity for self-reflection for both the staff and the students, from the feedback gathered, clearly had really positive wellbeing outcomes. And I'm really pleased to report that all of the pairs intend to maintain the relationship that they have built. And several of them have already made plans as to how in the next academic year they will maintain this, but on a more informal basis rather than being part of a research project. Challenges with this were, I've said here, kind of engaging the right people. So as I said, for this pilot study, I relied on volunteers, and inevitably that means you get the super keen students who always get involved in things like this, and you get the staff who already really care about student well-being and education. So that's something interesting to reflect on, if there would be ways to perhaps engage maybe those more introverted, shy students who could really get a lot out of this project, and similarly maybe staff who are not so involved in the student experience and would have a lot to learn from this. And of course, one of the big things within the international students talked about throughout the project was, yes, they felt closer with their staff mentee, they felt more part of the academic community in the school, but it didn't have any impact on how they felt about peer-to-peer relationships. So international students with home or UK students. Obviously, the project didn't really address that tension, which clearly is there and came out a lot in the mentoring meeting discussions. So again, something to think about how this might be developed in the future to try and involve UK or home students. So that was a kind of whistle-stop tour of the project. Please, I've put my kind of LinkedIn and Twitter things on there and my email. So please, if this is something that you are interested in hearing more about, please get in touch with me. I have just touched on some of the well-being feedback there, but there are lots of themes that have come out of the project, and I'll be happy to speak to anyone about them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. And again, if there are any questions, if they could be placed on the chat bar. Can I just ask you, I mean, at one point you spoke about, not sort of jeopardizing staff's professional position. I mean, is there any concern about sort of the undermining of the authority of the more senior participant in this exercise?
Yes, I think that was something that I was worried about, and I think there was only one staff member that brought that up in their opening interview, where they were concerned that this more informal, personal relationship with the student might lead to that kind of undermining of respect. But from the feedback, so the reflective logs and also the closing interviews with the students, it was really interesting to see that, they gave all this feedback on, I feel like I have a really close relationship with my mentee. I can talk to him or her about personal issues. It's a relationship that's different to any other that I have with staff, but there was a really clear line from everybody that actually I think their respect for those members of staff had increased in a way, because they understood them more. They recognized, I think it's this whole idea of kind of humanization that I think, as I say, actually increased the levels of respect these students had, because they recognized all the different facets of what it means to be a lecturer or an academic. And I think, because I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I think a lot of students think that the only thing we do is give them lectures. And I think this project really helped the students involved to see actually being an academic, being a lecturer, or, whatever position their mentee is in, is actually a huge job, and all of the challenges that come with it.
Can you see this being implemented on a widespread basis at all?
Well, I would love to say yes, but it comes back to the workload issue that I mentioned in the presentation, because this, if we think about comparing it with our personal TT system, for example, I know this will differ by university, but on average we have like 20 to 30 personal tutees each. We see them for 15 minutes 3 or 4 times a year, and that in itself, in those periods, is actually very time consuming. So I think you would the scalability of it, I think, is challenging within a law school or within a higher education setting. And I think where I'm going with it is more, I would like to partner it with some of the law firms and maybe think about getting some more senior people in law firms and taking this reverse mentoring even a step further, and perhaps having a reverse mentoring relationship between a law firm and students in the school. But I think in terms of how well it worked, I would love to say yes. And the feedback was that every member of staff should have this experience. And the feedback from the students was that I really think there were lots of other students that could benefit from this, not just international students. But thinking about the practical reality of that, I think it's challenging.
Challenging, yeah. Okay. Unless there are any further questions, we've actually reached 10 o'clock in the UK, 5 p.m. in Hong Kong. So thank you very much indeed, Rachel. And that concludes your participation, and I hope everything's
Thank you.
in Leeds. I don't know, is the sun shining in Leeds? It's not shining in
It's
London.
not. It's cloudy and grey.
Cloudy. Very
Yeah.
typical sort of summer British day at the moment. Anyway.
Yeah, especially in the north.
Let's not depress our friends in more sparkling France.